Welcome to The Drive with your automotive experts and hosts, Lauren Fix and Karl Brauer. Each week we deliver the latest breaking news, vehicle reviews, and inside look at what's happening in the automotive world. Buckle up, it's time to hit the road with The Drive.
Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl. I'm Karl Brauer with my lovely guest host, Lauren Fix. Lauren, how are we doing today?
Hey, Karl. Yeah, another episode. A lot going on in this week's show. We have a very fun guest, a good friend of ours, a man of the world, shall we say.
Yes,
He's been on before, Anton Wahlman, who lives in multiple countries and does some really cool stuff. Welcome, Anton.
Good to be here.
And if you want to see this, you can watch us on our YouTube channel, The Drive Car Show. Of course, we're also on podcasts if you miss it on your local radio show.
Yes. So, Anton, you've joined us today, and you've got a long history, like Lauren and I do, in the car industry, attending events, watching the rise and fall of various companies and models, and, well, in recent years, might call it fads, might call it themes. But I wanted to get into this because I think you've got a good sense of not just the product, but maybe the global view and the forces that are influencing the product, right? So we see the current EV situation, and it's interesting that we've got the U.S. clearly pulling back in every sense of the word on the EV push, but we see a little more confusion maybe, or at least uncertainty about where the EU, Europe, is going. And you have a lot of European background. I believe you grew up in Sweden. So what is your perception of what the European world's doing versus the US?
Yeah, so what happened if we go back in time, right? Both the North American market as well as Europe introduced what we commonly refer to as EV mandates starting about 15, 17 years ago. In the early days, there were tax incentives to get people to buy electric vehicles. They could either take the form of exorbitant taxes on non-EVs, which was pursued by just a couple of countries, most notably Norway. In other countries, there were mostly subsidies. So you could buy a car, you got some sort of tax credit or tax subsidy deduction of some sort for $3,000, $5,000, $8,000, depending on exactly where you live. So the thing started to come apart a couple of years ago when these very lofty goals translated into these mandates where automakers were de facto forced to make electric vehicles on an increasing schedule between now and about a decade from now. Or if they didn't, they had to pay tens of thousands of dollars per vehicle in fines. And it turns out that no matter how hard you try to push on these mandates, the dogs weren't eating the dog food. Basically, the consumers, at some point, there were only so many people who were willing to buy EVs. You had to really go into pure dictatorial schemes in order to push them. And those simply weren't available as policy tools in many countries. So the whole thing broke apart about 2 or 3 years ago when the automakers everywhere started going effectively almost bankrupt because they had to produce too many cars that you couldn't sell at a profit and then raise the prices on all the non-electric cars. And then, of course, that creates an absolute disaster in the marketplace. No profits for the automakers, and for the consumers, they don't get to buy what they want. So then came just last year when in the North American market, first of all, the US essentially abolished the so-called EV mandate. It gets a lot more complicated than that, but we're not going to go into that now. So now the question becomes, what happens in Europe? Well, what has to happen is the exact same thing, that they also are going to have to abolish their equivalent, de facto, the same thing, the EV mandate, but they haven't. So now the European market is in a bit of a limbo. They've tried to loosen the rules a little bit around the edges. The automakers are giving a respite of 1 or 2 years for these mandates, but it's clearly not enough. So basically, the European automakers, led by the CEO of Mercedes, but supported by essentially almost all the others, are now begging and screaming in Brussels and at their various national governments to get them to essentially do what we did here in the US just about 9 months ago when we scrapped the whole thing. And that's where we stand right now. And unless this gets resolved, there's going to be more pain, as Mr. T said in Rocky, for the European automakers. And they had better come up with something soon because the European automakers are barely scraping by at the plus minus point of breaking even now, and they're laying people off left and right, and this is hurting their economies. And it's not like they don't have enough problems to begin with. So, the next few months here are going to be absolutely crucial, and this will be what we will be monitoring for.
Although we have a global audience, we do have most of our listeners here in North America. How does that impact people here in the U.S.?
Well, it doesn't really impact them directly. So what it will hopefully do is that if the European new vehicle market is healthy, it is on the margin going to help exports from North America to Europe. So it would help Ford and GM and Stellantis to the extent that they are shipping some models to Europe. It would also help some of the factories located on US soil that are owned by the large European companies. For example, BMW's largest factory in the world is located in South Carolina. Mercedes is one of its largest factories in the world, located in Alabama. Volkswagen is in Tennessee, and we go down. There's plenty of examples of this nature. So they export, a lot of these vehicles: the BMW X5, X7, X3, the Mercedes, whatever, the two largest SUVs that they have, and so forth, from the U.S. to Europe. So to the extent that Europe can deregulate and make it possible for them to sell these larger, mostly gasoline vehicle or gasoline hybrid vehicles in some cases, that will certainly help the American worker and the American economy.
All right. Well, that's great stuff. We're going to take a quick break and come back because there's more to talk about. I want to talk about some of the other impacts that we've seen in Europe and the impact that it's having in the US because it kind of goes both ways. We will be right back with more on The Drive with Lauren and Karl.
Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl. This segment's brought to you by Classic Tube. When precision matters, professionals trust the original. From brake lines to fuel lines to transmission lines, every bend, every fit, engineered to perform, Classic Tube has the exact fit, trusted quality, and every tube is made and manufactured here in the USA. Okay, Karl, there's a lot going on the globe, but there's a huge impact to consumers here in the US when you go to the dealer lot. And I think this is something that our listeners really need to know about.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is we're talking about how Europe's regulations are hurting Europe, consumers and the companies based there. But they're also kind of making the US market that much more important. At least that's my theory. Because like you said, Lauren, people are able to go to the lot here now and basically buy whatever they want. I don't think that we all thought that choice would be around right now and going forward a couple of years ago. It looked like we wouldn't be allowed to buy big internal combustion engines or even hybrid vehicles that have to all be EVs. And Anton was just telling us how if they could deregulate in Europe, they could send more of the South Carolina produced BMWs and the Alabama produced Mercedes over there, which would help those companies. What I find fascinating to consider is how the European companies from over there are looking across the Atlantic going, thank God they can buy internal combustion and even hybrid vehicles again without restriction in the US. Those have profit margin. EVs don't for us. And we can at least keep the books not from completely collapsing on us. Our financial records not completely going into a tailspin because the European or the US market is looking much more healthy for profit versus the European market. That's my theory. What do you think, Anton?
That's exactly right, Karl. Basically, no matter where the cars are made, whether in the US, elsewhere in North America, Europe, Asia, anywhere in the world, the healthier the car market is in the United States, the better it is for everyone. Because it is basic free market economics that if the consumer is allowed to buy whatever they want at market prices, and the automakers are allowed to manufacture whatever they want without any particular subsidies or other push-pull mechanisms from the government, that's how you A, maximize corporate profit, and B, you maximize consumer welfare. And in that type of a scenario, all other things equal, you're maximizing the number of cars sold and you're maximizing the amount of profit per car. So whether you take an example here, you take the Ford Bronco or an F-150, even inside the model mix over the last few years, 3-4 years in particular, Ford has been very constrained in the mix that they are able to produce because of these crazy regulations that we were basically having to live under until just a few short months ago. And now they're not. So now they can make as many Raptors as they want. They can make all of the models and variants, and they can get rid of this ludicrous start-stop and other crazy technologies that just cost money and annoy the devil out of people. So now they can, vastly increase the sales price, the profit margins, and at the end of the day, the consumer is still much happier. So everybody's happier, everybody makes more money, and everybody walks away, in a winning deal here.
I think that's a key factor. I mean, people don't want to be told what they have to buy. It's like it's Coke or Pepsi. You can only have Coca-Cola. You can't have Pepsi. People get mad. They don't want to be told you have to buy. And so because that mandate is gone, it's actually good for consumers. And we're seeing a lot of brands starting to look at things differently. Like we had just heard this week that Ralph Giles, who's the head designer at Stellantis, said here in the US, we're not getting a lot of push toward SUVs. We're having a lot of people asking about cars again. And General Motors and Ford had already stopped it. The other brands did not. So we could see a lot more cars coming back. And those are the kind of things that you're asking for. So they're going to build it.
Yeah, I also look at someone like Stellantis, right, who had just bailed out on the last generation, the LX-based Chargers and Challengers. Tell me, you guys, that those things would not be gone. Those things still would have died if all these EV mandates and restrictions were coming through. They were selling, and they had talk about cost amortization. I mean, those platforms came from the E-Class in the 90s during the Daimler Chrysler merger. Yeah. So the profit margin on each of those models was amazing, but they couldn't keep selling them because they were getting fined so much. It was more than eating up whatever cost savings they had from the amortization. But did consumers want to see those cars go away? No. How is the new all-electric Charger done as a replacement? Well, they had two versions. They canceled one already, and the other one isn't selling that good. So we're going to take a quick break, pay some bills, and we'll be right back on this topic and more on The Drive with Lauren and Karl. Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl. This segment is brought to you by Karl Brauer Cars. That happens to be my YouTube channel, putting up a couple videos or more a week over there on everything from, the brand new 2027 Kia Telluride to Lamborghini Temerarios to Nissan Leafs. A lot of reviews over there for you to see. Got the Gone in 60 Seconds Mustang too. Got to drive that one, the one just like the one that was in the movie. Right. All right, so let's talk about the future. We've talked about the recent past and even the present. The recent past of EVs must be bought by everyone. Oh, wait, maybe not in the US, maybe even not in Europe if Europe can get their stuff together. But the future and the current, we're still a little turbulent for the Europeans. We don't know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen in the US, at least for the next few years. Make whatever you want as a domestic automaker and sell it to whoever wants to buy it. And I'm so jazzed because, as I was saying in the last segment, it's sad that we couldn't save those LX cars. We know those LX platforms would still be around if they hadn't been looking at those draconian fines that they were looking at the last few years. But they've got a new platform. I think the new Charger looks good. And I remember Tim. Yeah, it's big. But Tim Kuniskis told me years ago when that Banshee concept car was at the Detroit Auto Show. He looked at me and no one was around. He said, Karl, I can put an internal combustion in that too. So he knew back then that they might have an opportunity to not have to go all electric, and they've built the platform capable of that. And they've only got the Hurricane engine in it so far, but we know the Hemi is coming back. Yeah, as I like to say, Hemi days are here again. So we're gonna see some fun engines coming back into the Mopar brands that I'm a fan of, but that's just Mopar. Right. You were just saying, Anton, how everyone's happy when the car companies can make what they want. And what do they want to make? What the consumer wants. And they can buy it and make profit, and the consumer drives off the lot in the exact vehicle they want, which I'm thinking Suburbans with nice, powerful engines and good tow ratings and, more than 4 cylinders and all, not necessarily turbocharged and kind of struggling. But, what do you see as the next few years of U.S. production product plans from U.S. automakers?
Yeah, we have two fundamental problems in the market. Number one, the cars are too expensive for the consumer. Decent cars start dangerously close to the 25,000 mark now. It wasn't that many years ago, and that number was like 15, right? We all remember those. It was like blink a little bit. And for the automakers, the problem is that the cars are too expensive to manufacture. And the problem that underpinned much of the stuff was that because of these fuel economy mandates and EV mandates, they had to introduce these very expensive, relatively to the base price of the car, technologies that would eke out a fraction of one MPG, but cost in some cases well over $1,000 each the
Yeah.
stop-start technologies,
Which everybody
turbocharged
hates.
engines,
Everybody hates
turbocharged
that.
engines, all of these things.
CVT transmissions continuously very. I hate those.
Me
It
too.
could be anything, right? It could be all sorts of things that cost more money, and also in some cases increased maintenance cost over time, which is a true cost for the consumer. So if then now can get rid of those things, then what are we left with at the end of the day? We're left with a much more simple car, typically a naturally aspirated car, none of the gimmicks, no turbochargers, no start-stop technologies, and where essentially the consumer gets just as much as possible for the money. And those weren't really possible under the previous regulatory regime. And now we're going to get it. So I think that in terms of the design cycle that we started less than a full year ago, probably, in terms of the simplification of the engine choices that are going to become available here over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years at tops, I think we're going to exit this decade, barring any other extra subsequent regulatory changes, with essentially a slight reduction in price, all other things equal, because you can produce these vehicles at a slightly better price. So cut a grand or two off the price of the car because of this, and then now that you don't have to pay these EV mandate fines, that should cut another 3, 4, 5,000. So you could have a scenario where a $45,000 car could become $5,000 or $6,000 less expensive, and that'll
That'd be
take another year or two to roll over. But I think that's where we're going toward. All
great.
other things equal.
Yeah, I noticed. I talked to the sales guy in charge of Honda, and he told me that they have to start building cars at $20,000 again. Consumers want that; they can't get that, and now you're looking at used cars. If you've only got that $15,000 to $20,000 range, which used to be able to get you into like a Nissan Sentra, a Kia Rio, those are completely out of that price range, and it makes it tough for consumers to go, I just need something to get me to school or get me to work. I don't have $100,000 to spend on, something expensive and really nice. But that made the used car market very difficult to get your arms around as well. And here we are right now, but we're going to have to see car brands making what consumers want, and that means more reasonably priced vehicles. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And on that start-stop technology that I despise, when that greenhouse gas regulation was removed by Lee Zeldin in charge of the EPA, I contacted every single car brand, and they all said, well, maybe not for 26, maybe 27. So they're planning to leave that in. And until they remove that, which is going to save them money, which lowers the price of cars, they're going to actually be hurting at the dealer lots, and they're going to be hurting on their bottom line.
Yeah, well, I like the kind of synergistic effect that we're going to see here, right? Remember, you were just giving all the reasons, Anton, why the cars are going to cost less. And Lauren, you're talking about all the things that you hate about these cars. We get a double win here, right? If I walk out of the dealership with a car that's $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 less expensive, and it no longer has start-stop, it no longer has a CVT transmission, it's got a larger engine with better throttle response and more torque across the total RPM rev range because it's naturally aspirated and it's got more displacement. It's a win. It's talk about a win everywhere around. Better cars, less money. Simpler cars, less post-purchase maintenance problems because there's not as much electronics. No stalling out when I'm at the light. It's not stalling. It's a purposely stopping. But then you want to go, and you're like, it has to, And some of the cars, some of the start-stop technology, you guys know, it's horrid. It's horrid. It's like it does feel like the car has to wake itself up before you can leave the light, and it's not a good thing. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on more with The Drive with Lauren and Karl. Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl, and our special guest this episode, Anton Wahlman, looking at kind of both the US, but also in the context of the global automotive world, because Anton's kind of a worldly guy, and he's been looking at that and living throughout the globe more so than Lauren and I for many years of his life. Now, if we're going to talk at global automotive, you can't talk about that without talking about the four-letter word, right? Actually, I guess it's five-letter word, China. But we're gonna, we've got China. They're the constant, presence. Everyone's saying now that we are not pushing so hard for electric vehicles in the U.S. We're going to quote unquote fall behind China, and that China will get ahead of us and will never catch up. And of course, this makes a kind of assumption. This presumes that there is a future where it's not even a question that electric cars are how we all get around personally, and internal combustion cars are terrible cars that everyone's written off because they smell and they're not even good for the planet. Plus, they don't go, they're not as fast, they make a bunch of noise, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if we're going to get to a point where internal combustion has been obsoleted because we got solid state batteries that are cheaper and more powerful and charge faster than the current ones. So much so that it's a gasoline car looks obsolete. But even if we do get there, I feel like every time a new technology breaks through, the moat, the kind of monopoly on it doesn't last very long. Everyone else kind of just jumps in. All the other tech people jump in and they get caught up pretty quickly. This is all Karl's assumption. Anton, what do you think? Are we risking something by not trying to stay in the EV race as hard as China is, or are we not worried about that?
The only risk we're facing is any kind of government regulation that will presuppose what the market will look like. There is no we, there's only individual consumers making individual choices based on their needs and perceptions of the world. There is no one manufacturer. There are multiple manufacturers from all corners of the world experimenting in trying to, number one, satisfy those customer desires, and B, trying to invent new things that may move the ball in some direction, left, right, up, down, or forth and back. And that is an unknown. So we cannot have the government lock us in to any one solution. And the market, as it has existed over much of the last decade, is that the government essentially set the table in a way whereby it created a fake market for electric vehicles that never existed in the free world. Because in the free world, the natural demand for EVs was somewhere below 1% of the market. If you took away all the subsidies, all the penalties on gasoline cars, all the other nonsense, somewhere between 0.1% and maybe 1% of the market would have gone electric. They juiced that up to, depending on what country we're talking about, in the US, 9%, in Europe, almost double that, completely artificially with subsidies and other policy measures. Now, if you remove all of that, it's like when the tide goes out, we find out who's been swimming naked. It turns out that the Chinese were swimming just as naked as everybody else because they were forced by their government at home to do much of this stuff, and they were force feeding their products into various other markets with much of the stuff, and therefore they have a bit of a problem now. Of course, they're solving the problem because they're agile, right? I mean, if they see that all of a sudden demand in Europe is going to go from pure EVs to pure gasoline cars or maybe some hybrids, guess what the Chinese will make? They will make gasoline cars. They will make whatever hybrids, and they're pretty good at manufacturing pretty much. I don't care whether it's a toothbrush or a toilet bowl, whatever it is, they can make anything they want over there, and at a very, very competitive rate. So that's not the issue. A car is a complex thing. It's connected to the outer world. It's essentially a car bomb on four wheels, if you like it. It's a national security issue. That's why we have all of these restrictions now, where the software must come from starting next year and so forth. So that's more the issue at that point. I mean, where the car ultimately is made is not really the main point at that point. But really, the biggest risk that we face is simply the government telling the market where it needs to go. Because if it does, we're once again going to end up in the situation where the automakers are going to overinvest in one area and they're going to underinvest in some other area. The consumers are going to be super happy. The taxpayer is going to take a bath, and everybody loses a ton of money. It's a lose, 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 lose proposition as opposed to a win-win proposition. That's where it stands.
You are correct, Anton. And it's funny, when the Chinese wanted to get into the car market, they thought, how are we going to beat the Germans, who really were the benchmark? If you weren't building a vehicle, we used to say the A4, was it the Audi A4 or the A3? If you're not building a car at that quality, it's junk. And every brand sort of built to that level. So China knew that if they were going to come in making cars that were reliable, they would have to do something different. So they purchased all of the raw materials, all these mines around the world. And then they said, you know what? Everyone needs to go electric. They put this whole story out. They did a great job on their PR push, letting the world think that we're running out of gasoline, which we're not. And we all have to go EV. And if we've got the batteries, and guess what? We own all the raw materials and we own all the battery factories, and we're going to supply you with batteries. And then when that started growing and they started incentivizing their country, they started funding they have over 200 car manufacturers. So as they flooded into Germany to try to literally cut the price in half, they subsidized the price. Because if you were to look at an Audi A4, since we're using it as the benchmark, and it came in at $45,000, they would go, we'll sell you a car that looks pretty close. That's all electric for $25,000. So the consumer thought, I'm getting a deal. We're finding a lot of issues with Chinese cars that are out there in the marketplace. When it's cold out, their battery range changes. We still have no idea how they're going to hold up over the long haul. But if it's like anything that you buy that's Chinese, it's probably not going to be nearly as good as what the Germans, the Japanese, the Koreans, or the domestics make. But it's interesting. One of our past guests, Al Vasquez, was saying that in Bolivia, where he was just recently test driving cars, they have gas-powered Chinese cars everywhere because they don't have an electric infrastructure, which I find very interesting.
Same thing in Turkey too.
Yeah, right, Anton. It's almost like the Chinese are willing to make whatever they need to make for whatever market and tell whatever story they need to tell for whatever market that market wants to hear to make sure at the end of the day they just own all the market share and they start killing off all the competitors. And I'm really glad you brought up the whole raw materials thing, Lauren, because that's really the thing that drove this. Nobody wants to talk about it, but we all know that the combination of locking up all the raw materials to make the batteries that power electric cars, and then happily telling the narrative that everyone's got to go EV, or at least all the countries that can afford to. They weren't telling that to Bolivia, as you just noted, but they were telling that to the US and Europe and all. And by the way, all the EV batteries flow through us. So, but we've all got to go EV or the world's going to die. You know, they loved telling that story to those two markets specifically. And they subsidize it with the government funds. And I just keep telling people when they say, we got to learn to compete with China, I'm like, you're right, we got to learn to compete with China. So, you know, no minimum wage, no medical coverage,
no UAW.
No overtime. Yeah, no labor unions, none of that stuff. Let's compete with China, okay? So, do you like the idea of all that? Oh, well, yeah, that's what I thought, right? So, all right, we're going to take a break, but remember that you can watch us as well as hear us on our YouTube channel, the Drive Car Show on YouTube. And check us out there if you'd like to see our pretty faces as opposed to just hear our lovely voices. And we will be right back with more from The Drive with Lauren and Karl. Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl and our special guest, Anton Wahlman. This segment is brought to you by iSeeCars.com. That's where I'm executive analyst. And iSeeCars not only has all the listings that you'd expect for new and used cars, search across the country or in your local town or anywhere in between, and filter on price, features, make, model, current miles on the car, whatever you want to filter on. But there's also a lot of great analytics. We do studies every other week looking at what colors hold the best value, what car segments are growing or shrinking, which cars have the longest lifespan. It's one of our best ones. People love to know how long their car is going to last. We have all that on the site. All right, so we were talking before about kind of China's role in the competition or lack thereof with China. They don't want competition. They just want to smother everyone, and they subsidize their prices to make sure they can with the market share gobbling up. But there's also another big factor, and China is a part of this too, that's global, and that's fuel prices. And we all know, as we're recording this show, that fuel costs have gone up dramatically because there's been a bit of a conflict in a key part of the world that supplies oil. But we also know the U.S. has now, I believe, one of the biggest oil producers on the planet. We have excess oil. Only 3% technically of our oil needs come from the Middle East. Now, oil is fungible, as they say. So just because we can produce more here than we need, if there's less being produced in one of the key areas of the world, that's the global shortage, and the price for everyone, including us, goes up. But in the last 4 months, 6 months, we've made some changes in Venezuela that likely will lead to more free oil supply. And now we're in the midst of trying to make changes to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz that will also lead to more oil supply. We don't know how long it's going to take, right, Anton? But if we get there, it's hard to believe oil is going to be, and thus gas is going to be, more expensive than it is right now, or even than it was pre-conflict. It seems like it might be getting cheaper. What do you think, Anton?
Yeah, so I think this exposes a problem that we've had now in terms of our dependence on oil and gasoline coming from the Gulf. We have so many areas around the world that have plenty of oil, such as the United Kingdom or even the Netherlands. I mean, you can go to so many countries. Just take our most recent case here, Venezuela. We got some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but it's not enough to have the oil in the ground. First, you got to get it out of the ground, which takes an enormous amount of capital investment. And then once the oil is out of the ground, at some place, whether there or somewhere far away, you have to refine it. Remember, it's not gas that we buy. We buy gasoline and diesel. These are highly refined products. And then we have to transport those highly refined products on ships from various places around the country, around the continent, and across the oceans. I mean, I live in Puerto Rico, and we get all of our gasoline coming in here on ships that have to be special U.S. ships, and we have the Jones Act that just adds another dollar per gallon basically to the gasoline price here. So we've got these antiquated systems that vastly increase cost. And we got places like California, which have essentially banned gasoline and diesel refineries. So really the lesson that we should draw from all of this nonsense that is occurring right now is that we need to spend the money to extract oil from other places around the world, both inside the US and in other far flung places. And that costs a fortune. And then we have to refine it in all sorts of places. Again, enormous cost and investment, and often counteracted by these local and other government regulations that have really added tremendously to the price of gasoline and diesel around the world. So if you learn nothing else from this disaster that is occurring right now in terms of ships unable to get out of the Persian Gulf, it's that we really need to explore, extract, and refine products from all corners of the world, and then transport that refined products far cheaper around. And that is ultimately, they're successful in doing that, going to bring the gasoline and the diesel prices down to lower than what they were in the past. But you actually have to make these investments, and you have to deregulate. Without these investments and without such deregulation,
Yep.
we're not going to get there. So let's hope they get it done.
Well, President Trump did say he was going to suspend the Jones Act. So hopefully that'll help lower fuel prices, not just in California, but also in Puerto Rico. It's interesting is we're looking at oil prices and all this refining. If you take crude oil, what we hear crude oil price, that's what you hear on the news, crude oil, crude oil. If you were to take the crude oil out of the ground, that thick, black, molassesy type material, and refine it 5 times, you get diesel. If you refine it 7 times, you get something called heptane, which is the gas that you pump into your tank. So if there's less refining, why is diesel prices higher? It sounds to me there's a lot of fishiness going on as I drive around the country and I see diesel prices at $5.50. Here in Buffalo, I'm seeing $6 a gallon. That to me seems like a money grab. And I have a feeling that the Trump administration is going to look into, why did you hike the prices so high when we make diesel here and we ship it to other countries, including Germany? Why is it so high? And I find this to be extremely interesting, the fact that the prices are, it's almost like a price fixing. I think we've seen that before, especially in California where the prices are high, the taxes on everything have gotten higher.
Yeah, well, and don't forget too that I love that you brought up the refinement element, Anton, because I'm again here on the left coast, and I'm watching, as they're shutting down more and more refineries locally here in the Los Angeles basin area because of government regulations and costs. And then everyone's mad that the price of gas keeps going up. It's like, yeah, we just lost the ability to locally refine and then hardly have to ship that oil or that gasoline because it's refined right here. Now we're going to have to go pipe it in from somewhere else, which, by the way, is it more or less damaging to the planet to have local oil refinement and ship it to local gas stations, or have to go get it from Arizona or Nevada because we can't refine it here? So as is so often the case, we're going to do something earth friendly. Actually, I looked into this. You're making things worse for the planet Earth. If that's really your goal, that you're not, you're already making it higher and worse for consumers, but you're actually hurting the planet more too. So you're not saving anybody or anything.
We don't really know how central production should or shouldn't be made, how decentralized. But the one thing we do know is that the only entity that is bound to get that mix wrong is the government. So if the government just leaves its greasy fingers out of the way, oily or not, it's basically going to create an optimization in the market where we put these plants in the right places that yields the lowest cost based on the available means of transportation. And we just got to get this thing deregulated, and we got to get the capital investment in. So the companies got to be incentivized to put tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars into doing this. And we got to get the red tape away from where you can actually extract the oil from the ground. And we got to be able to build refineries pretty much anywhere.
That's 100% right, Anton. Well, thank you so much for being on with us today, Anton. A lot of great discussion. I think I know I feel more worldly. I hope all our listeners do too. But this has been a great time talking to you. Don't forget that if you miss these episodes, you can always go to thedrivecarshow.com. That's our website, and everything is on there. Links to all the past episodes, links to all the videos, all the information about us. Lauren and mine's pretty faces looking at you and telling you what's been going on recently. Everything's there. So go to there and you'll get even more information. And we will be right back after this break with more on The Drive with Lauren and Karl.
Welcome back to The Drive with Lauren and Karl. This episode brought to you by Car Coach Reports. We cut through the noise. That's my news channel. We give you information you won't get anywhere else. And if you're looking for my car reviews, check out Car Smarts. We cover everything from EVs, hybrids, and gasoline-powered vehicles. Whatever you want, we've probably driven it. Okay, speaking of driving, Karl, the cost of gasoline has gotten really expensive, and we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's best that we offer some tips for people to save their money, because obviously gas prices won't be long forever. It won't be high forever. But now what? Now, what kind of tips can we offer them?
Yeah. What can they do in the near term? Because I don't think this is a long-term thing. It's hopefully fleeting.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the number one things I think people forget about is checking your tire pressure once a month. And you use the number inside your driver's door on that sticker. Never, ever, ever use the number on the tire, because that's a maximum load. And that if you go to maximum load, you could blow a tire off the rim. And we've probably seen that in California as well as here in New York.
And even if not, you're going to have a terrible ride quality.
That's true. And also, if you've got overinflated or underinflated tires, they wear out early, and tires are no longer low cost. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite things to do is to forget the drive-through. I do. I don't know if you play this game, Karl. What I do is when I pull up to a drive-through for food or whatever, I look at the last car in line. I say, okay, it's a white Hyundai Santa Fe. I'll park my car and I'll run inside and try and get whatever it is I'm doing and try and get back in the car before that white Hyundai Santa Fe gets to the ordering board.
Yeah.
You can usually beat them. It's much faster to go inside.
Right. I know. And if you're trying to be both fuel efficient and earth friendly versus sitting in the drive-through idling all that time.
Right, use 0 miles to the gallon. It's really frustrating. But a lot of times there's some driving tips. I mean, you've probably heard this one about, don't run your air conditioning. But boy, is AC completely different today than it was in the 60s through the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say you can leave your windows up, because obviously it no longer runs on the engine. So it doesn't impact it the way it used to. And then, of course, all that basic maintenance, if you've got a check engine light, that can impact your fuel economy up to 40%. I don't know if you've ever changed an oxygen sensor. They're pretty simple to do.
Yeah, I have. I used to have a 89 Dodge Shadow, but it was the Carroll Shelby CSX version. They only made 500 that year with the variable nozzle turbo engine. And of course, I put in the Mopar performance parts computer, and it made it rev faster and gave it more boost. That car was undeniably quick, especially at high altitude with the forced induction. But it would clog an O2 sensor about every 8 months. So it was a little more than once a year. So I got real good at changing the O2 sensor in that car.
They're not that expensive either. You can go to any auto parts store, purchase an oxygen sensor or an O2 sensor, and replace it pretty simply. Just make sure the car is cool, because you will burn your hand.
Oh yeah. It's right by the exhaust header. Yeah.
Exactly. And so once you've done that, and if you've got a check engine light, it may not be that. It could be a loose gas cap. So all my useless information that I have, that last year 187 million gallons of gasoline. This is a true spec. I don't know who figured it out, but this is what they say, evaporated because of broken, missing, or loose gas caps. So when you fill up with fuel, click, 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 make sure it's tight.
Yeah, if you haven't noticed, if you've ever spilled a little fuel, much quicker than, say, water, it vanishes. So you should have an idea that if you're leaving your gas tank open, to the outside air, that's just sucking out the gas through evaporation.
Right, because the vapors are what burns, not the liquid. I think people think it's the liquid that burns, but it's actually the vapors. So keep that in mind, that if you've got a problem with your car, you can't figure out that check engine light, and you've said, hey, listen, I've tightened my gas cap, I've replaced my O2 sensor, and it still is not good, find an ASE certified technician. I happen to be an ASE certified tech. I am not a master tech. Those are the ones that have the blue and white gear on their sleeves. Let them do the work for you if you don't know what you're doing. And thing is, it's about having the engine run at its optimum performance. But the other thing is, if you got a hybrid, that's also a good thing. And those of you that have electric cars thinking, well, that's not going to impact me, the price of gasoline. Well, it probably will, because everything that you order online, everything you order on Amazon, whatever it might be, don't worry, there's a gas surcharge on that.
Yeah, and it's all delivered by internal combustion with rare exception. Real quick on the air conditioning, I wanted to mention, something else that a lot of people I remember hearing about that people don't think about is, if you put those windows down, especially if you're going at sustained higher speeds, your car's less aerodynamic. So you think you're saving money by turning off the air conditioning and putting the windows down. And if you're cruising along at above like 30 to 40 miles an hour, and certainly at highway speeds, you've just made the car less efficient as it travels through the air, and it's using more gas.
That's the whole thing. And shop around, use like Costco or BJ's or Gas Buddy or AAA, all of those. ways to save money all add up in the end. And the idea is save a few bucks and you can use them when the gas prices come down. You'll be much happier.
That's it. Well, this has been another great episode, Lauren. We had a lot of good fun, a lot of great guests, with Anton telling us what's going on.
Yeah.
But we will be back again next week on more with The Drive with Lauren and Karl.
You've been listening to The Drive, your trusted source for the latest car news, expert reviews, and real insights into the automotive world. Thanks for riding along with us today. You can check out the entire archive of every episode on our YouTube channel, The Drive with Lauren and Karl. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode and join the conversation by leaving your comments. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay safe, enjoy the ride, and we'll see you right back here on The Drive.